What this is a tool you can use in teaching Bible studies. We teach a lot of Bible studies out there. I'm convinced Bible studies is a terrific tool if we can figure out how to use them. Now, how do I start with a Bible study? I don't tend to hand out flyers for Bible study. I never have. Maybe it could work in your neighborhood. I don't know. What I tend to do is that as I meet people, I will get it out in the conversation fairly quickly who I am and what I'm doing, and try to get a word. If I can turn toward spiritual things as soon as I can, I try to do that. And then if they show interest, so talking a little more, I will ask them if they want to join a Bible study. Sometimes I will use a platform. I'd like to start. I think it'd be fun to start a Bible club in this neighborhood. Would you help me start it? Or would you? Would you help me start it? Do you know anybody else that could help us start it? Sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes if I'm talking to somebody, I will just bring it up. Tuesday I had an interview with a guy, and I was in an interview capacity, so I couldn't really go to spiritual things. There's some legal things there. But it did happen to come up that I was a Christian, and he was Catholic, and he had just moved to Hamilton from Long Island, so he was kind of looking for friends. And he said he'd like to come to Bible study sometime. So when I get home, I said, well, I'm leaving tomorrow. But when I get home, we'll get together for Bible study. We'll have you over for a cookout and get to know you a little bit, and then we'll start a Bible study. And I plan to go through this right here with him. Starting off, you see 8 lessons Bible survey course. That's the first one to pull out. I had taken different survey courses. I think an introduction course is probably the best way to tackle a Bible study. If you just try to core into it, this thing is a pretty intimidating book. And where do you start? Do you just open it up and find yourself in Ezekiel and try to start a Bible study there with somebody? Or where do you start? It's often a difficult place to start. Ezekiel, by the way, Ezekiel is probably not the best place to start with a new Christian, a new person. It can be pretty intimidating very quickly. We had done Isaiah a number of years ago in our Bible study, and a new person had come in. Well, I guess we had started right after she came, and she was pretty well lost to Isaiah. She stuck with it. It told me something about her that she stuck with it the whole way through Isaiah. And we probably did cover Isaiah in about 50 weeks or so we were in it for quite a while. That's probably the best place to start, but that happened to be where it was when she was coming. I had started off with the Creation to Christ Firm Foundations curriculum by New Tribes. One of the problems with that is it's really long. It's 50 lessons, and it gets into a lot of nitty-gritty. It might work well in the tribal setting. I did not think it worked very well among my neighbors and friends. We maybe don't have the patience. I don't know. It just seemed like the more I taught it, the more they couldn't follow it. Plus, normally they will teach it 2 to 3 lessons a day, 7 days a week when they go into a village teaching it, when they taught that curriculum. And I'm trying to do it once a week. So we're spending a whole year for a survey. By the time we get done, they don't remember what we studied the first little bit. And it's hard to tie it together. So I started to crunch it down. First, I turned it to about a 24-session class, and then I put it to 16. And then I looked at it and said, I need to condense it even more, but I can't condense this anymore. We have to start from scratch. So I started building from scratch. Used some of their material, modified some of it, used other sources as well. And this is what we ended up with. Started off with a 6th session, and I said, well, that's a little too ambitious. Maybe we better spread out a little more. And so now we're in 8 sessions. The first one is a little bit of an introduction. So you want to invite somebody. Let's just say you have 2 people you want to invite. You almost have to, or even one person. You invite one person, and you know the next thing that happens is they invite their friend for the next week. And now the friend missed the first session. Now what do you do? So the introduction to the Bible is the first session you get into as a kind of a stop-in week, just to get things moving. It is helpful. It talks about how we got the Bible, the different books. It gives a layout of it, kind of a way of teaching how we got the Bible. But if somebody misses it, you can catch that one up later. It's not needed to start the course. The second one is reflecting the divine, and we're actually going to go through that one. The third is about the children of Israel and God choosing his people. And then the fourth is about God's law, 10 Commandments. And first of all, start off with the Great Commandment. What is it? A volunteer, what is the Great Commandment Jesus said? Thou shalt love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. and all your strength. It depends which where you get it from is how it's going to be worded. And then Jesus added on, and your neighbor as yourself. That was not in the original Shema. The Shema was the original great commandment. Jesus added on, love your neighbor as yourself. But the Shema, we start off with that. The way the Jewish people understood it is the Shema was the foundation for all the law. And on top of that was built the Ten Commandments. I give you more description. And just because we're kind of dense and we don't always get the Ten Commandments very well, he put the whole Levitical law on top of that. So it's built off the Shema. Or you could turn it around and say it's hanging from the Shema. So we start with that and work our way down. The fifth lesson is Jesus being born, covers that, and an overview of Jesus' ministry. We don't get into everything. We're going to have 8 lessons, so you're not going to cover near everything. It is a flyby at 40,000 feet. And from there, after this, is when you start digging into more in depth. Lesson 6 is the kingdom of God. And that is kind of, in many ways, the kingpin to the whole series. That's the one you call everybody you know and ask them to pray and fast before you teach that lesson, because that is the important one. Number 5 is Jesus' death, resurrection. And then number 8 is the early church, mostly in Acts. It's still a work in progress because I never finish a curriculum. I always keep on modifying it and modifying it and modifying it. If you do want copies of it, I do have a few copies back there on paper. However, I think it's better to make it your own. So if you want a copy of it, email me there and I'll send you the Word copies, and then you can edit it and type it however you want. And you can use this as just a platform. So yeah, you can take the paper if you want, but it's better if you're going to teach your curriculum to make it your own rather than just teach somebody else's curriculum. That's my feelings on it anyway. Okay, pull out the second one, reflecting the divine. This is lesson 2. Like I said, the first one is a kind of an introduction to the whole Bible. If it's somebody that really knows the Bible and you think they don't need lesson 1, I would just skim it or even skip it altogether. But it's there so more of an introduction to kind of rally the troops in and get everything started. Reflecting the divine is the first lesson that really starts off with the Bible. Start off with a couple questions. What is God like? That's a question everybody pretty much has. What is this God like? Most people are going to agree with you that there is a supernatural power. If you really push them on it, they're going to agree there's some sort of supernatural power. There's some sort of a God. But what is the God like? If the God is simply a tree, well, what can he do for us? What can he really do, period? What is he like? Second one, and this is another big hook, what is my purpose in life? So there's 3 questions, philosophical questions of mankind, sometimes said. These are the 3 things that, the way you understand these questions will really determine everything about you. One is, where did I come from? Second one is, what am I here for? Or what is my purpose? And the third is, where am I going? So early on, we're going to zoom in on that first and second question. Where did I come from? And what is my purpose? And then the last one is, why is there pain and suffering in the world? I put it in there. It depends where you're teaching. That's not that important. But a lot of Americans really struggle with the question of pain and suffering. And so just having a little bit of tackling that question a little bit can help a little bit. Scriptural Texts. You need something?
We don't have this, I don't think.
Which one? You know what? I handed them out to people, but did they all go out?
This one went out. I don't know if it's the one you mean.
No, this one here.
We don't have that one. I can't find it.
Is there a stack of them anywhere? Who did I give it to? Who's up? Do you remember who was up there? I gave it to somebody.
Downstairs.
No, I gave it to somebody up here to hand out. I gave it to Marlon. He's probably carrying them around. Okay, we're going to hold that for now. We're going to switch on to the last thing I was going to do last is a Bible study for all it's worth. Okay, you have that paper? This is after we get through the survey, then I like to take people into book studies, preferably book studies. And this is what I use for that. It's a template. You can modify however you want. Put the text up top. Then you're looking for the big idea. If it's about Moses, say it's about Moses. Don't get too technical with it. It's just a template. And then you're looking at observations. You become a detective. A lot of times we want to dive into what things mean before we understood what it said. Figure out what it's saying first. Use the 5 questions. 6 questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. Use those to help understand the context of what's going on. And then make observations. When I was in college, we would be given a couple verses, and we were told to make 100 observations off of 2 verses. There's never 200 words in a text that we had to make 100 observations on. We always had more observations we had to give than words in the text. But it taught you to really dig into the text and ask questions and make observations. So yeah, make observations. I say at least 5 questions or 5 observations for each verse, and that should be very easy to do. You could make 5 questions, observations off of the verse, Jesus wept, very easily. Jesus, who is that? Wept. Does that mean cry? What does that mean? You can go for a long time with just those 2 questions. So after you make the observation, you switch to correlation or comparing. You start talking about what other information do we have that refers to this text. Is it maybe what's the climate like? What other information? And you start bringing all that in, and you can write that down there. And then you switch over to the next one, interpretation. This is where we tend to want to jump right away. Don't get the interpretation real quick. And in fact, if somebody is given observation and it's interpretation, I'll stop mid-sentence. Oh, no, hold on. You're getting to interpretation. We'll get there. Hold that. We'll get there. And then you want to make sure you go back and ask them what that was when you get to this point. But stop them. Don't get into interpretation because it's just bad habits. When you learn to read, you got a new book. Some of you children, if you're trying to learn how to read, and every time you get to a word you don't understand, your big brother or sister or mom and dad just say the word, will you learn to read very, very well? No, it's bad habits. If you're learning to play an instrument and you play 2 notes and then the teacher plays the rest because it's hard, you never learn how to play. You have to dig in and really learn how to do things well if you're going to do it at all. And then you find out what the purpose of the text is. As you go down through this, you look at the purpose of the text. And once you know what the purpose of the text is, why did God put this in the Bible? That's when you can start making applications. But don't stop. Don't just walk away from now. A lot of people don't want to make observations or applications that mean anything. So make an application that is very personal and something you can address this next week. Don't just say, oh, we're supposed to love our neighbors better. If you're talking about love your neighbor as yourself. I'm supposed to love my neighbors better. No, what does it mean to love your neighbor? And so I'm going to love my neighbor by doing this week. Make a personal, practical application. Okay, so that's what I do with Bible studies after we go through the survey course. So kind of got things reversed around here, but you can lay that paper aside and we will get back into the Reflecting the Divine paper. So yeah, the questions: what is God like? What is my purpose in life? And why is there pain and suffering in the world? Some questions that usually will perk somebody's interest. And they usually stop sleeping when you start saying, we're going to talk about this tonight. That usually grabs people's attention. Scriptural texts. I like, if the person is able to, I'd like to have them read at least some of it. It helps everybody feel like they're part of the course. At the same time, some people are not interested in reading. So don't push it. I would probably, in this one here, have them read Genesis 1. Well, yeah, scriptural text. I might have them read a little bit in the beginning. I'm not going to have them read a whole lot here. Especially Ezekiel and Isaiah, I'm not going to have them read that too much. Now, I also will keep those passages for when I'm reading in the section. So the first section is Genesis 1, 1 and 2. You can see that. And that's where I'll probably have them read. So God created the universe. We get into that. God creates the universe and have them open up, show them where Genesis 1 is, and have them read verse 1 and 2. That's pretty simple. Most people can read that and understand it. You might want to watch what translation you use. I'm not against the King James Version, but a lot of people really are going to struggle to it's not in their heart language anymore. So it's okay to use that, but you might want to switch to something like a New King James or even the NIV, just so they can, this makes at least a little bit of sense to them. I personally like to see lots of different translations of Bible study because it helps you get different angles from the text, and you can understand things a lot better. So God creates the universe. And then God creates spirits, angels, and then the mutiny of Satan. Everybody always wants to know, what about the angels? What about spirits? What about the devil? Everybody always wants to go there. So you're going to have to address it. Don't dwell on it too long, though. And most of the people you talk with are going to want to stick there. They want to know about all this spiritual stuff. No, you stick with the text. Say we know about the text, and then walk away from it. We don't know. You don't know. I mean, if there's something that the Bible does not say about angels, don't guess at it. Just say, I don't know. And the Bible doesn't tell us that. It doesn't tell us, like Thomas Aquinas trying to figure out how many angels could stand on the head of a pin. We don't know. Okay? Don't know. What happens to my dog after it dies? Does it become a baby? We don't know. I don't think it does, but we don't know. So don't guess at it. Now, I guess we do know a dog's not going to become an angel, but what happens to my dog after? Is it going to go to heaven? Well, we don't know. Maybe God's going to bring our pets along. I kind of doubt it, but the Bible doesn't say, so I'm not going to guess at it. I don't think he's going to, but I don't know. What you're mainly trying to figure out with this next section with God creates spirits and angels is the focus on the mutiny of Satan, and that Satan rebels against God. And when Satan rebels against God, God casts him out of heaven. That's the main gist here that you want to cover. But we're just kind of ramping up. The part that we're going to spend a little bit of time on this morning is man and women are created and the fall of mankind. Okay, we've got time. So why don't we turn to, if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis 1, 26, 27. Don't have your Bibles, that's fine. Anybody can quote that? Huh? Genesis 1, 26 and 27. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And then we're going to make an observation. Who are the main characters here? Say them out. Who's the main characters? God? What did you say? Man and woman. Yep. Don't say Adam and Eve, because they're the house yet. We know their names later on, but if this is the first time you picked up the Bible, we don't know. So, God, man, and woman. And they were created, and God created them in his own image. For what? Okay, he made own image and in our own likeness. So we have image and likeness. And that's a phrase that ought to ring bells to us. But a lot of times we kind of say, oh, image, what does that mean? Oh, yeah, we look like God. No, what does it mean to be created in God's image? Well, it's to mean to reflect God. If you want to know your purpose in life is to reflect God to your neighbors. Okay? When you have a reflection, you can kind of see what the reflection is or the object is by the reflection. One of the things I will do sometimes is I have a tractor that my grandfather made. And it's made of wood, and it's pretty well and pretty detailed. It's a pretty neat tractor. And I'll start asking him, what is the person like who makes this tractor? You can say this. What's the person like who makes this? Tell me about the person. Well, they know how to work with wood. They're patient. Go through a whole lot of things. So this tractor is a reflection of my grandfather. And it tells you a lot about my grandfather, simply because you see his creation. And you can learn a lot about God simply by looking at people around you, looking at the world around you. So yeah, we are created to reflect God. The second one is represent God. What does it mean to represent God? I need a volunteer. You want to volunteer? No? I need a volunteer. Who wants to volunteer? Somebody come up here. Harold, why don't you turn around and sit right here? This is King Harold. Okay? In Near Eastern times, if you were a king, everybody that was following you would get a little image, or make a little image of the king. And that image you would keep in your house, or if you really wanted to show your patriotism, you might make a big image and put it in your front yard. And that showed who your allegiance was tied to. Is your allegiance to King Nebuchadnezzar? No, my allegiance is to this king of whatever. No, everybody could see who your allegiance was. And it was not so much territorial as it was, your dominion or your reign, your rule was not so much territorial as it was who is your allegiance to. You can sit back down in your seat now if you want. So if you wanted to follow King Herod, if you wanted to follow, your king, if you could say anybody sitting on red chairs is of his kingdom. And if there is one folding chair in here, you can be sitting all among the red chairs, but if you're sitting in the folding chair, you're not part of his kingdom because you aren't reflecting him. You're not reflecting his throne. You're not reflecting him. Now, when it says we were created in God's image, it goes on to, we're supposed to have dominion over the fish of the earth, the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air. That's all a part of that kingdom. So yes, we're supposed to reflect God, but also represent him. We're supposed to have dominion over all this. That is our purpose. I have a little note there. You can read it. I'm not going to talk about it. There's another thing that was interesting. When you would send an ambassador out, you would send an image with your ambassador. And that said, I speak for God. We're his image. We speak for God. That's how we were created for. Now, everything's good, right? We are representing Christ, representing God. We're reflecting God. Everything's good. And then turn to Genesis 5. And I'm going to show you something here, and then we're going to back up. Genesis 5, 1-3. Genesis 5, that's the chapter you never read, right? It's genealogies. You never read that chapter. There's something here that's worth reading. It all is, but especially the beginning. This is the book of genealogies of Adam. In the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, and he created him male and female and blessed them and called them mankind in the day that they were created. Very similar to what we heard earlier. Male and female was created in the likeness of God. And Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness, after his own image, and named him Seth. What's the difference? Did you pick up on that? There's a difference between verse 1 and verse 3. What's it talking about? Now we're talking about image and likeness. Go ahead, Paul.
Adam had a son in his own likeness.
His own likeness. That's different. Verse 1, Adam is created in God's image, and Adam has a son in his own image. Well, what's the difference? Well, we know, I think we all know, the difference is before Seth was born, Adam and Eve disobeyed God, they rebelled against God, and they no longer reflected God the way they were created to reflect God. And so their children had that marred reflection. It's a world that's kind of falling. I'm not saying that they have sin like some people would say, but their reflection is marred. This world is not the way God created it to be. It's harmed. And that is why we have a broken down world. That's where the pain and suffering comes from. Because Adam and Eve fell, introduced pain and suffering into the world, and we have a broken world that we have to work in, we have to live in. And that's usually what gets people thinking. And you want to make sure they understand that God is not the creator of pain and suffering, but mankind is the one who brought that upon ourselves. Because that's something that a lot of people really struggle with. So make sure you get that continued and covered. Yeah, the difference is Seth was born after the mutiny of Adam and Eve. Another thing I usually cover in this area is the idea of sanctions. Is that on here? I thought it was, but maybe I don't have it in here. When God gives out curses, those are like sanctions. And if you think of Iran, the U.S. has sanctions on Iran. Why are those sanctions on Iran? Well, to try to pull them back into where America wants them to be. Well, God put curses or sanctions on the world to try to pull this back, to help us understand what we're doing isn't the way it should be, and to pull us back. And then you try to drum some intrigue for the next one. Yeah, the story continues. Over the next few lessons, we're going to see the results of these sanctions on mankind. It's rough. It's tough. I lived in Haiti for a couple of years when I was little, and the U.S. had an embargo on Haiti. And there was no gas. There was no food was scarce. It was tough living. because of the sanctions that were in Haiti. And yeah, we live in a world that God put sanctions on, and it's tough. It's not the Garden of Eden where everything is nice and easy and you just go eat fruit whenever you want it. And no, now we have to farm, we have to pull weeds, we have to, all that stuff. It's tough. Why? Not because God says you're bad and I'm going to hand it to you. No, he's trying to call us back. And as soon as the world, as soon as we are called back and everything's good, then those sanctions are going to be lifted. Now, I'm looking forward to that day. It's not here yet, but one of these days, those sanctions are going to be lifted. And we're no longer going to have cicadas flying around in our ears. I guess most of you didn't have that. We had a lot of cicadas the last couple of weeks. It was pretty rough. Yeah, God wants to restore us to himself. The ambassadorship continues on. He wants us to be his ambassadors. But we now live in a world that has declared mutiny on God. So the consequences will still continue on. Effectively doing work, if you don't use the tools, you won't be effective either. We probably all have lots of books on our shelves. And if you don't know what's in those books, they won't help you at all. It only helps you if you know what they are and you find out ways to use them. Again, if you want copies of this, email me or take copies from back there, but email me, and I'll give you the Word copies and you can modify them yourself. Make it your own. Don't just teach off of this. Make it your own. You can use this as a platform if you want, but make it your own. That way it comes from you and not from a book. So how do I know what they know? Lots of people know a little bit, and they know piecemeals. They know the story of this and the story of that, but they know the whole picture. I like to go through it. And I've went through it with people that knew the Bible fairly well. Surveys are important. And for those of you who are pastors, I would highly recommend you do a Bible survey in your congregations at least every 2 to 3 years. You've got to have a framework to put everything in. If you just take a section here and a section there, after a while, we don't understand how it all goes together. So put the framework together. And we will revisit this. We started this with a year and a half ago. Within the next year, I'm going to do it all over again with them, just to help put the framework together, help pull us back to the core. So I would recommend you do it all. I mean, to go through it. But the first lesson you might be able to skip over if they know that. But the rest of it, I would recommend you do a survey every couple of years. This is just one that you can use. The Bible is an onion. Or you could say garlic. You take off a layer at a time. And too many times we probably want to take a core out of the onion rather than peel a layer off in our teaching. And soon our churches have a core here and a core there and a core there, but they don't really see how it all gels together. So do a survey fairly often. So you can't miss a lesson. If you have 2 people and the one person doesn't show up, they can't go to the next lesson so if they miss lesson 4 about God's law, they can't just continue on. They have to understand God has a law and what the law is. And so you have to either catch them up or go on without them. You can't just bring them in next week. So we had 2 people that were coming. There was actually a group of about 6 people that were in this class. And one couple, we got to lesson 5, I think it was. I think it was lesson 5. And we were going down through a little bit, just hitting over the Great Commission, the Sermon on the Mount, and we got to the Lord's Prayer a little bit. And people were asking different questions about this, and one person came up with the question it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And she asked, if I don't forgive my debtors, does that mean that Christ won't forgive me? So what do you think it means? Well, that's what it looks like. I said, well, I think that's probably right. Now we made sure we understood what she meant by, that we all understood what forgiveness is. And yeah, you got to forgive. And she wrestled with it. And the other 2, as soon as she brought this thing up, they just kind of went solid. They weren't making eye contact anymore. And they were very bitter people. They were both divorced and remarried and just had a lot of bitterness to their exes. And they didn't want to talk about forgiveness. Not at all. And so I turned my attention over to the one that was asking the questions. Next week, they didn't show up. So I called them up and, hey, we need to, they had an excuse of some sort. They had some sort of excuse, but it was kind of lame. I knew they didn't want to talk about it. So, hey, you want to catch the next lesson because we need to keep lessons in series. So we went to their house, invited us over, went to their house, taught the next lesson. Next week, they didn't show up again. I asked them if they want to catch up. Yeah, we got to do that sometime. Okay, I hear it. And they never showed up again after that. Well, at least I didn't spend 2 years trying to figure out where they belonged, what category we were in with them. Later on, they did come back and want to start Bible studies up again, but it was last summer, and I was so overwhelmed with people that were coming in. I said, I don't have any more time. I'm sorry. I gave them a few other names of people that maybe could. I didn't have the time. And I said, if you want to, I was thinking if we are going to start, we're going to start right back there where we stopped before. Forgiveness, that's where we're going to start. Because that was the stone that was getting them. So yeah, if they don't show interest, and if they quit out, at least I know now rather than 2 years from now. Be patient with people, but don't give people too much time if they're not interested. Eventually you have to sow the seed and then wait to see if it germinates later on. You can't just keep on sowing the same seed in somebody if they are not interested, especially if there's lots of other people around. If you're in a small town, you maybe have to give a little more time to people. But if you allow people stopping in, you have to filter people eventually. Okay, this right here, I say this is just an idea. Figure out some sort of Bible introduction course. You need to have something in your tool belt. That has to be one of your tools that you can pull out and use. You can use this one. Cams you could try to use. I don't know what it's like, but I'd have to check it out if I were you. If it's what I hope it is, I would probably use that over the Firm Foundations one, because Firm Foundations, I feel like it's not really built for our culture very well, and not really built for an Anabaptist worldview. So if they've fixed some of those things, that'd be a good thing. But you need to have some sort of Bible survey course to introduce the Bible. Bible introduction course, something. And don't make it too long. Keep it fairly short so that when you tell somebody, hey, I have this 8-session course, let's go through that. That's 2 months. People will buy that a lot quicker than a year-long Bible study. They usually will jump for that a little quicker. So find some sort of course, develop your own, whatever, but this is a tool you need to put in your toolbox. And then Bible studies after that, you also need to find a way to teach Bible studies. Now, one thing I didn't mention here, when I teach Bible studies after they've gone through the course, we're just going through a book study. I don't have a ton of study time because every hour I spend in study means that I cannot be studying something else for my own growth or working with my family or doing other things. I don't study for these courses, for these classes at all. We study together. I do not look ahead, hardly ever will I look ahead what we're studying next week. If you feel more comfortable doing that, that's fine. 2 reasons I don't study. Number one, when I study, I talk too much. And I know that is a weakness, so I don't study so that I don't talk too much. Number two, if I study, I tend to go too deep. And if you're working with people who don't have a lot of biblical knowledge, think of them at a 10 or 11-year-old level. How would you explain it to your children? Do not get too deep into the weeds in theology. If you got to pull a lot of Greek terms in, you're way too deep for your average neighbor. So keep it at a level they can understand. And sometimes if we just read it and say, what is it saying? What does it mean? We can keep it on their level a little more. As you get down more, you can maybe study a little more, but don't overstudy for stuff. It's time that sometimes you're overstudying for a class, you can spend too much time doing that. I'm of the opinion you keep things simple, and I don't care who I'm talking with. I want to keep it simple. I rub shoulders with academics some, and a lot of times they understand the complex things, but when it gets to simple things, it tends to be a little bit of a struggle. So keep it simple for everyone. Jesus he did teach some deep theological things, but a lot of it was stories and parables and teachings like that. And he kept it very simple, very, very applicable to their lives. We should do the same thing. And also, another thing, learn to tell parables. Learn to tell parables. Your own parables. I got a few minutes. I'll tell you one. A number of years ago, I was at SMBI. There's an old tunnel, turnpike tunnel, just close by there. And you can ride, bike, or walk through this turnpike tunnel. It's a mile long. It's concrete. And you yell in there, and it echoes for a long time because it's a mile-long tunnel. And one year I rode my bike through there. It was kind of a cloudy day, and as I rode into this tunnel, I didn't have a flashlight, and it got dark, like really dark. And if you ever tried to ride a bike in the dark, that's a difficult thing to do. But I'm pedaling along, and it's getting darker and darker, and after a while, am I heading for the wall? Am I heading for the end? Where am I going? And I noticed when I did that, if I could close my eyes and just listen to the walls, and I could hear which wall I was closer to, and then I could just turn my steering wheel a little bit and keep going out through. So I rode with my eyes closed. Try to do that sometime, boys. Ride with your eyes closed. I rode with my eyes closed, and I'm riding along a little bit, and this is kind of maybe not the greatest idea. And so I open my eyes up, and as I open my eyes up, immediately I see down way at the end, I see a little bit of a light, actually a little dark spot, and on either side is a little bit of light. And I thought, Jesus said about looking to, the person that's plowing, looking back is not fit for the kingdom of God. I wonder if that works with bike riding. So I just focused on that there. And I noticed when I did that, I also didn't hit any walls. But that crack between the two lanes, I was hitting that crack at a much less varying. Before I was going like this, because my hearing isn't as good as my eyes, and I'd hear, and so I'd swerve over and I'd swerve back. And when I started focusing at the end light, I started noticing I was just varying off a little bit. Well, that's one thing. So yeah, focus on the end goal gets you there much more directly. Another thing is, when I was listening with my ears, I was just avoid the walls, don't fall in the ditch. And if I hit the ditch, just a moment lapse in concentration, I hit the ditch. Well, I just messed up, and I failed. I was trying not to hit the walls, and I hit the walls. When I focus at the end, if I have a lapse of concentration for a little bit and I hit the walls, my objective is no longer don't hit the walls, it is get through the tunnel. I'm focused on getting there. So I can pick up my bike and keep riding. It's a difference in perspective. Parable that. When we are applied to Christ, don't just look, I want to avoid this sin, and I want to avoid this, and so I'm just trying to push everything off as I walk along. No, focus on Christ. And if you focus on Christ and try to follow Christ with everything you've got, these things, yes, they might get close to you at times, but you don't stumble and fall and ruin everything that God created because you're still trying to focus on Christ. So learn to tell parables. People love stories. If you can learn to tell parables in your teaching, it will keep them focused and it helps them to grasp it and remember it. So yeah, that's something else in teaching is tell parables. Westerns aren't good at telling parables. We're just not. Eastern people are much better at it than we are. Learn it. It's a trait that Jesus used, and it's a good thing for us to learn as well.